Hi, welcome to Just Recap. Today, we are going to see a movie just like heaven. Film opens with Dr. Elizabeth Masterson sits in a charming-looking garden encompassed by fog. The camera shows around the fog lastly to her seat that is all the way awkward in that elegant garden. Elizabeth awakens in an emergency clinic break room/cafeteria where she is informed that she nodded off and needs to return home since she has been there 23 hours. She answers that she can't and she really wants to continue to work because she has a desire to get the attending doctor post. A montage of her functioning around the hospital starts. She is good at her job and great with individuals she attend. During this time we meet her opponent at work, Brett, and discover that they both are going after same doctor post. We likewise discover that her sister is expecting her over for dinner and that dinner was set up for her to meet somebody. When she's off the telephone, she and Brett run into their chief, Dr. Walsh. Dr. Walsh informs them that there was a shot casualty whom the two of them volunteered to take, yet since Brett has been there 12 hours, he'll get to take it. After Brett leaves, Dr. Walsh says to Elizabeth that, in view of her skilled work and good care for the patients, she will get the attending doctor post. He then, at that point, tells her that 26 hours is sufficient and she wants to return home for some rest. As she leaves, she sees Brett in the parking area. There is a fair setup of strain between them as he hesitantly salutes her on her being picked for the post. While on her way to her sister's home for the dinner, she calls her sister to apologize for being late. Her sister, Abby, says it's all right because that her date hasn't appeared at this point. All of a sudden, she sees a truck coming towards her and the screen blurs to dark. Cut to David Abbott as he looks for a fully furnished apartment to rent. His real estate professional continues to show him exceptionally odd apartments. As they are going to give up, Wynn drives a flyer into his face about an apartment which they hadn't seen at this point. They go to it, see that it is a decent apartment still available on the grounds that it is being rented on a month-by-month premise because of a few strange conditions. David chooses it as it is perfect anyways. We currently see David lounging around and drinking beer. He doesn't appear to be doing anything more with his days. One day, while sitting in front of the television, Elizabeth appears and advises David to leave her apartment. They argue and Elizabeth goes to call the police. David follows her into the following room, yet when he arrives, she has disappeared. David proceeds to see his friend, John, who is additionally his therapist, since he accepts he is hallucinating. John tells him that he simply has to get out and that these hallucinations will disappear. David chooses not to go out and on second thought keeps on being lazy and drink beer. He sees Elizabeth few more times and starts to feel that she might be the ghost of somebody who used to live there. He visits a mysterious bookshop where he meets Daryl. Daryl gives him a few books to read and David returns home to face Elizabeth, incapable to convince Elizabeth that she is a ghost. Elizabeth attempting to irritate David to leave, David hires some people to get rid of the soul. First is a priest, and then a few Asian ladies playing out a ceremony, then some cheap Ghostbusters. Lastly, Daryl. Daryl says he can feel Elizabeth and that she is serious areas of strength for soul that she may not be dead. Daryl additionally tells David he really wants to relinquish the soul that is hunting him, his wife who has died. Daryl leaves and Elizabeth asks David about his wife. Obviously, it has been 2 years since she passed on. David actually experiences difficulty moving on. David is upset about the conversation and chooses to go out with his friend John for a drink. Elizabeth follows and forces him out of the bar he went to by possessing him. She then, at that point, says she wants assistance figuring out what happens to her since she can't remember. David says he will help her. Any other way, he would concede he was conversing with somebody who wasn't there and consequently owning up to craziness. They start by visiting every one of the neighbors and getting some information about Elizabeth. None of them truly realized her and one young lady starts hitting on David. they follow a few different signs and figure out that Elizabeth is in coma in the hospital where she worked. Likewise, during this time, David explains that he was once a successful landscape architect who was specialized in making gardens, and they go to see a portion of his work. The garden they visit is the one that Elizabeth imagined about toward the start of the film. After they find Elizabeth's body in hospital, David returns home while Elizabeth chooses to stay with it. Ready to go through walls, Elizabeth checks her friends, and Brett, her opponent from the very start of the film, got the going to attending doctor post. Abby, Elizabeth's sister, comes in to visit at that time, discovers that Elizabeth had a living will, yet the choice to allow her to die will be surrendered to her. Elizabeth rushes back to the apartment to find the neighbor young lady there putting the continues on David. The neighbor young lady goes into the room and requests that David come in. Elizabeth is a piece crestfallen and goes to look out for the rooftop until David is finished. David appears on the rooftop, saying he sent the neighbor young lady home. Elizabeth lets David know that she initially got the apartment so she could put a garden on the rooftop. David says that he won't let Elizabeth die. They initially go to Daryl, who tells them not to attempt to sort out some way to return Elizabeth to her body and why no one but David can see her. Then they visit Abby's home to convince her not to sign the paperwork, but rather she as of now has, and ending up chasing David out with a butcher blade when he says he can see Elizabeth's soul. With Elizabeth scheduled to die in the morning, Elizabeth asks David to simply keep awake and talk with her the full night. In the morning, David says he will take Elizabeth's body so they can put it someplace safe, since he won't let her die. According to Elizabeth, to try and get an opportunity to do that, they need somebody with a van and no ethics. Next shot, David drives John's van in transit to the hospital. Once there, David explains that his non-existent friend is really alive and capably convinced John regarding this since John knew Abby. In fact, David was assumed to be the blind date at the dinner Elizabeth was going to, yet David experienced some sudden nerves and Elizabeth got in the accident. As John and David take Elizabeth's body, Brett stops them. David ends up punching Brett out and getting security approached him. While John and David escape security, the respirator keeping Elizabeth alive gets pulled out. As she starts to die, her soul begins to fade. In a last moment, David kisses Elizabeth, which brings her soul back, yet he is immediately pulled off by security. Elizabeth's soul fades as David watches. Then, her body comes back to life and she awakens. Seeing that David had the option to save Elizabeth, they let him go, yet Elizabeth doesn't remember David. David leaves looking extremely depressed. Enter another montage where both Elizabeth and David look sad. At the point when the montage closes, Elizabeth moves once into her apartment, which David needs to leave since he just had it on a month-to-month premise. She says it seems like something is missing yet can't figure out what. While glancing around, Elizabeth goes up to the rooftop where David is simply finishing up her delightful new garden. David says that he just wanted her to have her garden and that he used the extra key that she had told him regarding when she was a ghost. Elizabeth says she realizes him yet can't recollect from where. David says he doesn't want to scare her and starts to leave, however stops to hand back the extra key. At the point when she touches his hand, Elizabeth remembers everything and they kiss. Then the camera shows around and the apartment transforms into a snow globe in Daryl's hand, who says, "Righteous," and the film ends. Thanks for watching.